What we have to do is we have to make sure that our rails are safe. Democrats passed a $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill, and only $5 billion went towards rail safety. This is a failure. It would have never happened under a Republican-controlled infrastructure bill.
Is that why Marjorie Greene decided to vote against the infrastructure bill? Because she was concerned that $5 billion for rail safety just wasn't enough money? Is that why she voted against it? Of course that's not why she voted against it. And I guarantee you, if that bill had a provision appropriating $20 billion for rail safety, Marjorie Greene, much like most other Republican lawmakers, would give it the middle finger. Now, we should also remember that when Donald Trump was in office, he did this, cute little thing called deregulation of the rail industry, essentially reclassifying certain chemicals in a way that would allow for the transport of these chemicals in an unsafe way. Should have required a lot more safety, other protocols, but of course that deregulation had an impact. And I'll give you the details of that in just a moment. But of course, while Marjorie Greene pretends to care about rail safety, she goes out of her way to pretty much ignore the deregulation angle. Let's hear more from what she had to say during this interview on Hannity's show, and then I'll tell you the truth.
Is happening every single day, and now thousands of people, birds, animals, they're all sick, and we don't know the consequences of this horrible accident in East Palestine. But we have people like Ilhan Omar. She wants to, crack down on corporate greed when it comes to rails and the privately owned sections of rails. But really what we have to do is we have to make sure that our rails are safe.
Corporate greed has a lot to do with why the train derailments have been happening, why our rails are unsafe. I mean, it's amazing to me because she's like, Ilhan Omar wants to talk about corporate greed. Yeah, because corporate greed is tied to what we're seeing right now in the rail industry. Don't believe me? All right, I'll give you the details here. So first, why don't we actually hear from, the Railroad Workers United, because they pinned the threat on rail industry cuts to inspection staff and the elimination of safety protocol. The East Palestine train was hurried, the nonprofit said in a statement, and though a cause hasn't been fully determined, it appears the train was not properly inspected. Now, I don't know, guys. I don't know. Why would the rail companies eliminate these incredibly important workers, especially since these workers were tasked with following safety protocols, doing the proper, inspections to ensure that the trains were safe, the rail system was safe. Why would they cut all those employees? Could it be maximizing profit, which is tied to, corporate greed? Let me give you more. They cut so many workers that at the peak, there used to be 1 million rail workers. Keep that number in mind. Rail companies laid off more than 20,000 rail workers during a 1-year period between 2018 and 2019, representing the biggest layoffs in rail since the Great Recession. And the nation's rail force has dipped below 200,000, the lowest level ever, and down from 1 million at its peak. Gee, I wonder why they would do that. Could it be because they want to cut costs tied to labor so they can, engage in corporate stock buybacks, maybe some dividends for their shareholders, because that's exactly what happened. That's corporate greed, Marjorie Greene. That's what that is. Let's give you more. They have cut the hell out of the workforce, and there are big plans to cut it further. Just because the rail companies are profitable doesn't mean they're healthy, and that's according to a former Norfolk Southern freight engineer. Of course, Norfolk Southern is the rail company that had the East Palestine train derail last week. So, I mean, is this something that concerns her at all? Or is she gonna attack Ilhan Omar out of nowhere because Ilhan Omar accurately pointed to corporate greed and how it relates to all the derailments that we're seeing and experiencing in this country. I mean, it is amazing though, right? Because just yesterday, Marjorie Greene's like, I don't know, what can I talk about that doesn't touch on corporate greed? Because I can't upset the corporate donors, the Republican Party. I need to avoid it, so what can I blame this on? Oh, I know, the workers, they're lazy. These lazy workers, there's a labor shortage. I mean, there is some evidence to indicate there aren't enough workers, but even before the pandemic begun, the companies were laying off a ton of rail workers. To do what again? Oh yeah, to cut costs, to provide a higher return on investment for their shareholders. That's called corporate greed. I mean, it is amazing. And then there's the deregulation angle. There's a lot going on there. We've talked about it before, but let me remind you again. The US Transportation Department in 2020 approved a rule to allow liquefied natural gas, or LNG, to be shipped via rail with no additional safety regulations. Trains can now run 100 or more tank cars filled with 30,000 gallons of the substance, largely from shale fields to saltwater ports. So 2020, who was in charge in 2020? Oh, that's right, it was Donald Trump. Yeah, that deregulation, not a good idea. But look, to be fair, the Biden administration should have reversed that. We'll get to that in a moment. Just 22 train tank cars filled with LNG, by the way, hold the same amount of energy as the Hiroshima bomb, a coalition of environmental groups wrote in comments to regulators opposing the LNG rail rule change in 2020. And look, the Biden administration was like, yeah, we're gonna reverse the deregulation that Trump did for sure. Like, we're on it, except they haven't done it, okay? So according to The Guardian, under the Biden administration, the Transportation Department, which of course Pete Buttigieg is the head of, has proposed a suspension of the Trump-era LNG rule, allowing the substance to be transported via rail and to replace it with a new rule. But you know, the suspension was supposed to be published in June of 2022, but it and the new rule have been delayed, not once, but twice, and are now supposed to be final in March. We'll see if that happens. David Sirota just caught Pete Buttigieg in a lie where he tried to pretend as though the Department of Transportation can't unilaterally regulate the rail industry. You wanna know how David Sirota caught Buttigieg in a lie? The Department of Transportation responded to his reporting in the form of a tweet to say, no, we actually totally do have the ability to regulate the rail industry unilaterally. Oops. So look, when Marjorie Greene goes after Pete Buttigieg, she's right. I mean, she's attacking him while also ignoring that it's her daddy who did the deregulation in the first place. But I have no problem with the critique toward Pete Buttigieg, because there absolutely could be more action taken by the Transportation Department. And I also agree that he is really not fit for that job, wasn't qualified for that job, but hey, he did drop out of the primary race to give President Joe Biden a boost during the Democratic primary. So favor for a favor, quid pro quo, you know how that works. Now, let's skip ahead a little bit because I wanna talk about that corporate greed and exactly what these rail companies do with the money they save from cutting their workforce, so much so that they ignore safety protocols and also overwork the employees who remain, which is why rail workers were about to strike because they're not even allowed to take a day off without retaliation. Family emergency, who cares? We don't have enough workers. There's no one to take your position or fill in for you if you have a family emergency. So no, you can't do it. Now, what they do with that money is fascinating. Let's focus on Norfolk Southern specifically, okay? This headline says it all. This is from the Motley Fool. It was published yesterday. After double-digit revenue growth last year, is Norfolk Southern stock a buy? By the way, their stock is doing great. Totally doing great. Doesn't matter, this disastrous story in Ohio that is putting the local community there in jeopardy, their health in jeopardy, their health at risk, didn't really hit the markets. There's a little dip, right back up. So Motley Fool's like, should we buy this little dip? Because we know it's gonna do well pretty soon. And by today, stock is back up. But let me give you some more details on just how healthy Norfolk Southern is financially. Railway operator Norfolk Southern enjoyed record revenue and operating income last year. Last year's record, $12.7 billion in revenue, marked a 14% gain on an 18% jump in yearly revenue per unit. Oh, they're doing so well. You know, just fire a bunch of employees. Sure, I mean, you put local communities at risk. There's that whole issue with train derailments, but the profits, the shareholders love the profits. And in a shareholder-friendly move, Norfolk Southern Corporation, NSC, announced that its board has authorized a new $10 billion stock repurchase plan starting in April of 2022. So this was something that was published last year. And I think it's important for you guys to know where their resources go, because they're not investing back into their company to ensure that they have the appropriate workforce to do the proper inspections and avoid these train derailments. No. They fire workers, they save a bunch of money by doing that, and then they take the billions and they park it into their shares to basically artificially inflate the value of their shares. Let's also keep in mind that the executives mostly get paid in stock options. So they literally have a vested interest in beefing up the value of their shares. So that happens, but there's more. Norfolk Southern also rewards its shareholders by paying out dividends. Evidently, NSC has hiked its quarterly dividend payout thrice. From March of 2021 to March of 2022, the most recent dividend hike was announced in January of 2021, to be specific, when NSC decided to purchase its quarterly dividend by 14% to $1.24 per share. And they announced that in 2022, not 2021. But you guys get the point. The system is set up to work this way. All right, so if you don't want to call it corporate greed, then just call it the fiduciary responsibility, something that I talk about on the show all the time. This is how the system works. The executives at these rail companies aren't concerned about East Palestine, Ohio. They're not concerned about rail safety. Their number one priority, like any other corporation that's publicly traded in this country, is their fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders. That means maximizing profits, ensuring that their stock's doing real well, ensuring that their shareholders are happy with their fat dividends, and everyone else can F off. That is how the system is set up, period. So when Marjorie Greene talks about how Ilhan Omar is crazy for mentioning corporate greed, just know that the dumb one is Marjorie Greene, because she is literally a United States lawmaker who doesn't even know how our system works. She's pathetic. I would just love one day where I'm not embarrassed by the lawmakers in Congress. Just one day, just one.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.